The principal's door clicked shut with a finality that sent a chill down Adriel's spine, and the words from Mr. Hargrove's mouth hung in the air like a death sentence. Several parents have submitted formal complaints demanding your immediate resignation, citing your personal life as a risk to the boys. What Adriel didn't expect was that the same students he had poured his heart into teaching would soon become his fiercest defenders in a battle that would test every part of who he was. Adriel, 32 years old and the English literature teacher at the elite Lincoln Boys Academy in Seattle, stood frozen for a moment, the leather-bound folder in his hands suddenly feeling like lead. The office smelled of polished wood and old books, the same scent that had comforted him for 7 years as he guided seniors through Shakespeare, Fitzgerald, and the quiet power of words that mirrored their own unspoken struggles. Today that comfort had vanished. Mr. Hargrove, the principal with his wire-rimmed glasses and measured tone, slid the stack of printed emails across the desk. 3 parents, all prominent donors, had seen Adriel and Victor at a downtown charity gala 2 weeks earlier. Nothing overt had happened, just 2 men in suits sharing a quiet conversation and a brief touch on the arm, but in their eyes it was enough to label him a threat. "They worry about influence," the principal said softly, not meeting Adriel's gaze. "They want someone whose life aligns more closely with traditional family values." Adriel swallowed hard, his mind flashing to the classroom just down the hall where 18-year-old Ethan had stayed after school last week to talk about the bullying he faced at home, or Marcus, whose essay on identity in The Great Gatsby had revealed more vulnerability than the boy probably intended. Those moments were why Adriel stayed at the academy despite the long hours and modest pay. He loved shaping young minds, watching them grow into confident men who questioned the world rather than feared it. Now those same parents were ready to strip that away because they had glimpsed the truth he had guarded so carefully. He left the office in a daze, walking the sunlit corridors lined with trophy cases and motivational posters. The academy's brick buildings overlooked Puget Sound, their ivy walls glowing in the late afternoon light, but the beauty felt mocking today. Back in his small apartment in Capitol Hill that evening, Victor was already home, sleeves rolled up as he stirred pasta sauce in the kitchen. At 35, Victor was an architect whose tall frame and easy smile had been Adriel's anchor for 3 years. They had met at a bookstore reading, bonded over shared dreams of a quiet life away from prying eyes. "How bad?" Victor asked without turning around, his voice steady but tight. Adriel dropped his bag and sank onto a stool. "They want me gone by the end of the month unless I can prove I'm not a distraction." He recounted the meeting, the accusations, the way his stomach had twisted when the principal mentioned the board hearing scheduled for next week. Victor set the spoon down and crossed the room, pulling Adriel into a firm embrace that smelled of basil and safety. "We knew this day might come," he murmured. "But you're not alone in this." They talked late into the night on the couch, the city lights twinkling beyond the window. Adriel confessed the fear that had lived in him since college, the conservative Midwest family that still sent polite but distant holiday cards, the colleague who had quietly reported the gala sighting to administration. The betrayal burned. Victor listened, then reminded him of the life they had built together. Weekend hikes on the Olympic Peninsula, quiet evenings designing dream homes on Victor's drafting table. The way Adriel's laughter filled the space between them. Yet Adriel could not shake the internal storm. Was his love for Victor worth losing the career that defined him? The next morning Adriel taught his senior seminar as if nothing had changed. The boys leaned forward during the discussion of The Color Purple, debating resilience and hidden truths. Ethan raised his hand, eyes bright. "Mr. Lang, how do you keep going when the world tells you to hide?" The question hit too close, but Adriel smiled and answered honestly without revealing himself. By lunch the whispers had spread. A fellow teacher avoided his eyes in the lounge. Adriel's phone buzzed with a text from his mother in Illinois. "Heard rumors. Call me." The pressure was building like a tide, and he wondered how long he could hold his ground. That evening the phone call with his mother went exactly as Adriel feared. Her voice, once warm with stories of church potlucks and family barbecues, now carried a careful distance. "Adriel, people are talking. Your aunt saw something online about complaints at that fancy school of yours. Is it true? Are you involved with that man?" He closed his eyes, gripping the kitchen counter while Victor watched from the living room, concern etched on his face. The conversation ended with her quiet plea to think of your future, and a heavy silence that felt like another door closing. Adriel hung up and turned to Victor, the weight of years of half-truths pressing down. The following days blurred into a tense rhythm. At school, the administration placed him on paid leave pending the hearing, citing neutrality during investigation. Adriel spent the hours at home rereading student essays, each one a reminder of why he fought so hard. Marcus had written about overcoming his father's expectations. Ethan described finding his voice through literature. These boys saw him as more than a teacher. He was the adult who listened without judgment. Meanwhile, the parents' campaign gained traction. A petition circulated on local parent forums demanding role models who reflect community standards. Victor tried to shield him, suggesting they take a weekend trip to the mountains, but Adriel could not escape the knot in his chest. One afternoon, Victor found him staring at old photos on his laptop. Pictures from their first anniversary, arms around each other on a ferry crossing the Sound, faces lit with uncomplicated joy. "Remember when we promised no more hiding?" Victor asked gently. Adriel nodded, but the fear was louder. What if coming out fully meant losing everything? That night, they sat on the balcony under a sky heavy with stars, Victor's hand steady on his knee. "I love the man who teaches those kids to be brave," he said. "But I also love the man who deserves to live openly." The words lingered, stirring something deep in Adriel, a flicker of the courage he preached in class. Yet doubt remained. Colleague betrayal cut deeper when Adriel learned the tip had come from Mr. Ellis, the history teacher he had mentored during his first year. At a coffee shop near the academy, Ellis had spotted them and chosen loyalty to school values over friendship. The realization left Adriel reeling, questioning every casual conversation they had shared. At home, Victor listened to the hurt spill out, then pulled him close. "People fail us sometimes, but the right ones stay." Their conversation stretched into the early hours, touching on Victor's own journey of accepting his identity after a difficult coming out in his 20s. Adriel felt the bond between them strengthen even as external pressure mounted. By week's end, the school board email arrived with the hearing date. Adriel stared at the screen, heart pounding. Victor made tea and sat beside him. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The words were simple, but they anchored Adriel through another sleepless night. He thought of the students who had no idea their letters of recommendation might soon be needed in a different way. The internal conflict raged: sacrifice his authenticity to keep teaching, or risk everything for the man he loved. The choice felt impossible, yet the tide was already turning in ways he could not yet see. The hearing loomed like a storm cloud, and Adriel spent the days leading up to it in quiet preparation. He reviewed his contract, gathered performance reviews, and wrote a statement he hoped would humanize him without exposing too much. Victor supported every step, reviewing drafts late into the night while rain pattered against the windows of their Capitol Hill apartment. "You're not just fighting for a job," Victor reminded him during one particularly heavy discussion. "You're fighting for the right to exist fully." Adriel nodded, but the words stirred old fears. His family back home had grown distant after the initial call. His father sent a single text urging discretion. The isolation weighed on him, amplifying the internal crisis he had carried since realizing he was gay at 17. At the academy, even on leave, Adriel received unexpected visits from former students who had graduated and heard rumors. One young man, now in college, stopped by the apartment unannounced. "You taught me to stand up for what matters, Mr. Lang. Don't stop now." The words stayed with Adriel, planting seeds of resolve. Meanwhile, Victor's work suffered as he juggled deadlines and emotional support. One evening after a long day, Victor confessed his own frustration. "I hate watching you shrink to fit their box." The honesty sparked a rare argument. Not angry, but raw, where Adriel admitted the temptation to simply resign and protect their peace. Victor's response was quiet but firm. "Love isn't supposed to cost you your identity." They reconciled with a long hug, the kind that spoke volumes without needing words. reinforcing the foundation they had built over 3 years. The night before the hearing, Adriel could not sleep. He paced the living room, replaying every classroom moment, every student who had trusted him with their struggles. Victor finally rose and joined him, wrapping a blanket around them both on the couch. They talked until dawn about the future they wanted, maybe adopting one day, traveling to places where no one knew their story. The conversation brought a fragile peace. By morning, Adriel felt steadier, though the knot of anxiety remained. Arriving at the board meeting, he found the room packed with parents, some holding printed petitions. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Adriel sat at the front table, Victor in the audience offering silent encouragement with a steady gaze. The chair called the session to order, and the complaints began. Parents spoke of moral guidance and protecting impressionable boys. Adriel's hands trembled as he prepared to respond. Inside, the battle between fear and authenticity raged fiercer than ever. He thought of Victor waiting, of the students whose lives he had touched, and wondered if this was the moment everything would shatter or finally come together. The hearing had only begun, but the emotional stakes had never been higher. The board chair called for public comments, and the room shifted. Adriel braced himself for more accusations, but the first voice that rose was not a parent's. A familiar figure stepped to the microphone, Ethan, now 18 and one of Adriel's former seniors. The boy, usually quiet in class, spoke with surprising clarity. Mr. Lang taught me that real strength comes from honesty. He never pushed any agenda, just helped us think for ourselves. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then Marcus followed, reading from a folded paper. When my dad left, Mr. Lang stayed late every week to help with essays and life advice. His personal life never once affected that. One by one, more students and recent graduates approached the mic. Each story painted Adriel as the mentor who listened, challenged, and cared without condition. Adriel sat stunned, tears threatening as the testimonies continued. He had no idea the boys had organized this. Victor caught his eye from the audience, a small smile breaking through. The parents who had demanded his firing shifted uncomfortably. The board members exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for the outpouring. After the last student spoke, the chair called a brief recess. In the hallway, Victor pulled Adriel aside. "They're fighting for you because you fought for them first." The words landed like a lifeline. Adriel felt the first crack in the wall of fear he had built around his identity. Back inside, the board allowed Adriel his statement. He spoke of dedication, of the joy he found in literature and young minds, of the careful line he had walked to protect his students from any controversy. He did not mention Victor by name, but the love he carried for his partner infused every word. The room listened. Afterward, a board member announced they would review the student letters. Over 100 had been submitted by email that morning, before rendering a decision in 2 days. Driving home with Victor, Adriel finally let the emotion surface. "I thought I'd lose everything," he whispered. Victor reached across the console, squeezing his hand. "You almost did, but look what you gained." At home, they sat on the balcony again, the city lights reflecting on the water. Victor shared his own pride, admitting the strain had tested him too. Their conversation deepened the bond, moving from crisis to quiet hope. Adriel reflected on the internal growth happening amid the chaos, the shift from hiding to recognizing his worth. Yet he knew the fight was not over. The next 48 hours would decide his future, and the weight of that truth kept him grounded even as gratitude swelled. The student's courage had mirrored the lessons he taught, forcing him to confront the man he wanted to become. The 2 days of waiting felt eternal. Adriel returned to the academy on light duty, teaching one class while the board deliberated. The boys greeted him with quiet nods and supportive smiles, their letters having spread through the senior class like wildfire. Ethan lingered after the bell one afternoon. "We weren't going to let them take you away, sir. You showed us what standing up looks like." Adriel thanked him, voice thick, realizing the impact had flowed both ways. Meanwhile, Victor worked from home, checking his phone constantly for updates. The couple shared quiet meals and longer talks, Victor encouraging Adriel to imagine life after the decision, perhaps staying at the academy openly or exploring new paths together. On the morning of the decision, the boardroom filled again. Parents sat on one side, students and supporters on the other. The chair cleared his throat and read the verdict. After careful review of the complaints, performance records, and an overwhelming number of student testimonials, the board has voted unanimously to retain Mr. Lang. We recognize that personal orientation does not define professional excellence. Applause erupted from the student section. Adriel exhaled a breath he had held for weeks. Parents grumbled but filed out quietly. Their campaign deflated. Outside, reporters waited. Word had leaked to local media. Adriel answered a few questions honestly but briefly, crediting his students and refusing to sensationalize. Victor stood beside him, hand on his shoulder in quiet solidarity. Back home that evening they celebrated simply. Take out Thai food and a bottle of wine on the balcony. Victor raised his glass. To the man who finally gets to breathe. Adriel laughed, the sound freer than it had been in months. The conversation turned reflective as they recounted the journey. The misunderstandings with family, the colleague's betrayal, the internal war that had nearly broken him. Victor admitted the strain had made him question whether their love was strong enough. But the students' letters had reaffirmed everything. Later, as they sat together watching the city lights, Adriel felt the last pieces of his identity crisis settle. He was no longer the teacher who hid. He was the man who taught courage by living it. The growth was profound, from fear-driven silence to authentic presence. Victor's steady support had been the anchor, their relationship deepening into something even more resilient. Yet Adriel knew challenges remained. His family would need time. Colleagues might still whisper, but for the first time he felt equipped to face them. The night ended with a tender promise whispered between them, the kind that sealed their future without fanfare. Weeks later, life at Lincoln Boys Academy settled into a new normal. Adriel walked the halls openly, no longer glancing over his shoulder. Students approached him with even greater trust, sharing stories of their own journeys with newfound confidence. Ethan and Marcus organized a small appreciation event after school, presenting Adriel with a framed collection of all the letters. "You saved us in ways we can't explain," Marcus said. Adriel accepted it with tears, hugging each boy briefly in turn. Professional, proud, and deeply moved, the experience had transformed his teaching. Lessons on identity and courage now carried the weight of lived truth. At home, Victor had begun sketching plans for a backyard addition to their apartment building, a small study where Adriel could write the book he had always dreamed of. Their evenings filled with laughter again, the earlier strain replaced by quiet joy. One weekend they drove to the Olympic Peninsula, hiking trails they had once avoided for fear of being seen. Hand in hand under towering evergreens, Adriel felt the final shift, complete acceptance of himself and the man beside him. "Thank you for never letting me hide," he told Victor as they watched the sunset over the water. Victor smiled, pulling him close. "We did this together." Back in Seattle, Adriel called his parents. The conversation was tentative but honest. His mother cried, his father listened. No full reconciliation yet, but the door had cracked open. The growth was real. Adriel no longer measured his worth by others' approval. The ordeal had forged him into a stronger partner, mentor, and man. As the school year drew to a close, Adriel stood before his senior class for the final lecture. He spoke of endings and new beginnings, eyes meeting each boy's with genuine warmth. The applause that followed carried more than academic respect. It carried gratitude. Victor waited outside, leaning against their car with that familiar smile. They drove home together, windows down, music playing, the future stretching bright ahead. True or false? A dedicated teacher's personal identity should determine whether he deserves to keep teaching the next generation of young men.